Hello, welcome. And today we are going to launch ourselves into an anthropological and zoological post-Darwinian journey. Yes, the survival of the fittest, to discover the delights and rarity of a brand new mammal species. Well, maybe not so rare, maybe not new, maybe only recently defined. Now, what I'd like you to do is glance at the attractive, sparkling, and soon to be revealing and chatty, I hope, Goldster inside guest, whose species is defined as Nacaridus maternius, a female whose male counterpart is bearded Grumpius paternius. And it's an increasingly common variant, we are told, in the human form, particularly while raising children, and whose origins may have been in the New Forest in Great Britain. Now, the Maternius strain has discovered an elixir of life, a solution to all exhaustion and pressures in a decent glass of wine. This is called the Knackered Mother's Wine Guide. I mean, you've got to like it. And it doesn't just simplify wine, it simplifies life, according to India Knight of the Sunday Times. Now, our guest also has a fine and structured mind. She used to be a supermarket wine buyer. She runs an award-winning blog and has an imagination rich with, rich with tenderness, to write 2 uplifting novels. This is one of them. This Changes Everything, and there's a latest one, In Just One Day. It's where life and things can change in a nanosecond. So welcome Helen McGinn to Goldster Inside Story.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
So you're a Nacaridus maternius, is that correct?
I am very much one of those creatures, usually found to be lying on the sofa in a state of utter exhaustion with either a small glass of wine or sometimes quite a large glass of wine within reach.
Now, I must say you're looking particularly colourful and unknackered. Is that a word, unknackered today? Now, I got to say, and you're also a trooper, because we did a pre-show brief yesterday, didn't we? We talked to the authors for 10 minutes beforehand just to check that we were all on the same page. But you, it was during a fire drill at Waterloo Station?
Yeah, so I thought I'll find a nice quiet spot to talk to you, Humphrey, and I managed to find the noisiest spot in the whole of London town, which was the middle of Waterloo Station whilst they were doing a fire drill.
we managed to get a bit done, didn't we? Managed to earn our keep for a bit. Now, where are you today, though?
So, I mean, this so sums up my life. I have my other job. I do have a proper working job in wine, and I'm at a meeting today, locked in a room most of the day talking about wine, but in the most amazing location, which I have to share with you, because this is Lord's cricket ground. No, it's not Lord's. I'm at the Oval. I'm at the Oval.
The Oval cricket ground. God, that's the cricket pitch, is it? And the seats. Are you in a private box with just you? Are you?
I am in a private box with just me. I was in all of the others are in the box next door, but I excused myself for an hour to come and talk to you, which I have to say is really lovely.
Brilliant. Now we're going to talk about wine and novels, and for our lovely audience, pop into the chat what your favorite wine is, why, particularly when you're knackered, and we can discuss it. Helen will give our view, and we have 2 competitions that we're running today. These are very serious competitions, these. The first one now, and then the second one we'll do maybe after the half hour. And the first competition is, and there's no right or wrong answer to this, is what wine would you have with char-grilled vegetables? What wine would you have with char-grilled vegetables? Put it in the chat, and we'll see. When we get a right answer, we might go on to it. And then the second one that we have after the half hour is going to be matching wines against literary genres. So we're going to match them against literary genres now. Now, before we get on to the wine, though, I want to talk to you about love, if that's all right. I know we're jumping around a bit, but in this book here, This Changes Everything, on the back, you ask a question, or somebody asks a question: should first love be left in the past, or is first love forever love? So what is it for you, Helen, or what was it for you?
Well, my own experience, and obviously you always assume your own experience is quite normal, and it's only when you tell other people that you realize that it's perhaps not entirely normal, is that I actually met my now husband when we were 4 years old. And we met at our village primary school. And in fact, the first thing he ever said to me the first thing he ever said to me was, "Stop following me," because apparently I just followed him round and round the playground. I feel we're among friends, so I can share this story.
Of course you can, yeah.
Anyway, we then actually got together when we were teenagers. I was about 15, and we have been together ever since. And yeah, so a really long time. And in fact, even stranger, we lived in London for about 15 years, and then we moved back to Bewley, where we live in the New Forest, back to the same village where we were both born and brought up, and all our parents all live within a sort of but we're all very close by, so it's like a sort of mad commune.
Goodness, so your first love is forever love?
So far.
but from this first love that is forever love, you have 3 children and some dogs and cats, is that right?
We have 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. They're all teenagers now, and we have 3 dogs, and we have a very mad cat, and we live in the beautiful village of Bewley. We can walk to the river, and we basically live, right in a house in the woods.
Goodness, a house in the woods, first love, forever love. I mean, we're getting into magical territory here. So now, how did you, or why did you first fall in love, not with a human being, but with wine?
With wine. Okay, so I would love to say that, it was a very elegant journey into wine. But to be very honest, the journey started because as a student, it was the cheapest way to have 4 half glasses of wine on a Thursday night was to join the wine society. So as in the university wine society. So genuinely we joined so that we could have, I could go along with my friends and we could drink wine quite cheaply, because we were always on the lookout for a bargain. And It was during the course of going to these wine society meetings, and they would happen every month, and every month somebody from a wine company or a wine shop or a wine producer would come and talk to us, and we'd taste through some wines. And like everyone else, I just, I was having a very jolly time. But over time, I just remember I got totally hooked into the idea that, it's one raw material, which is a grape, and yet it can taste so different depending on where you plant it and how you make it. And that wine is the thing that connects people. All the people I ever met who came to talk to us about wine, they loved they loved their wine. They got to travel to amazing places. They got to work with brilliant people, and they just seemed to be having a really lovely time. And I remember thinking when I was at university that perhaps that's what I could do, is go and get a job in the wine industry. But I didn't really have a clue where to start. And I knocked on a few doors of big traditional wine companies, but they didn't have a job for somebody who was just in their second year at university. And so I actually ended up joining a graduate scheme for a big supermarket. And that's when I then became a wine buyer for 10 years for Tesco.
You Tesco wine buyer. So when we see that label on there, sort of gold 5-star from a place we've never heard in the world, that could be you and your colleagues bringing it in to sell it to us. Now, I'm going to ask you about the wine guide in a second, but we have some answers, some very quick answers to our question. I think we've got a right one here, but I'm going to read them all out. Yeah. And we have Iris says her favorite wine is Saint-Emilion. Patricia, and this is the question is char-grilled vegetables. Yeah. Patricia is Sauvignon Blanc. Emma is red wine. I'm not sure if that's her favorite wine or if it's with the char-grilled vegetable. Carmel says crisp white Pinot. A red one, it's usually red for me, is Liz. Chilean Sauvignon from Iris, and Barbara Snell says Bandol Rosé.
But I have to say I'm with Barbara. For char grilled vegetables, I'd be on the rosé. And actually, Bandol rosé is a brilliant rosé to go for because that's quite a punchy rosé. You know, it's got a bit more fruit and weight to it than some of the paler ones. So that would be a gorgeous partner with grilled vegetables.
There we go. That's fantastic because you have rosé there, don't you? I can't remember what it is. You had a Spanish rosé or something.
Yes, exactly. Something nice and a really nice, jolly, fruity rosé, yes. But dry. Must be bone dry.
So now I'm going to ask the second question, the second competition. This isn't the literary genre one yet. We're going to stick with food because we got such good answers there. Which is the best wine to have with spicy chicken drumsticks? You expect not to have wine with spicy chicken drumsticks. Which is the best wine? Put it in the chat, and we'll see where we get with that. Now, so you were a supermarket wine buyer, traveling the world, were you? You were going to Argentina and Australia and all those places?
Yes, so I looked after most of France, South America, so a lot of time in Chile and Argentina in particular. New Zealand, I was lucky to buy for. A lot of Eastern Europe I did, so Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria, Portugal I did for a while. So there were a team of 4 of us back then, and we split the world up by country, and so you each had a different area to look after. But I mean, I was really lucky. In most of the 10 years I was there, I had France and South America as my 2 specialist areas. And I mean, it was just, you remember the advert with the man from Del Monte who used to turn up in a white suit?
Yes, yes.
It was genuinely a bit like that, but not in white, because you wouldn't want to wear a white linen suit if you're tasting wine. But I spent a lot of my time either in cellars or in vineyards with winemakers.
And your taste buds are up to it. I mean, are you a sommelier? Is that what they call? Are you?
I'm not a sommelier, but I've done. So when I started buying, there are certain wine exams you have to do. So I did 4 years of wine exams. So you do certificates to start with, and then you do a 2-year diploma. Plus all the training to be a buyer generally. So really the most important thing though, and I would say this to anyone, is that anyone can taste and get better at tasting. Some have more sensitive taste buds than others, but generally speaking, we're all given the same kit. Yes. The trick is to use it. So the reason why I know as much as I do is because I taste so many wines. So all the time, it's like just loading up your memory bank of different smells and aromas and flavors, so that after a while they start to fall into place. You know, different grapes will be a bit like, okay, I can smell a wine and think, well, that's a Sauvignon, smell another one and think that's a Chardonnay, smell another one, and even where they come from. And that's all part of your wine training, is you really have to hone your palate.
So you could tell a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc from an Argentinian one by smelling it, could you?
In theory, yes, but the amazing thing that's happened since I've been in wine, and I've been in this industry now for about over 25 years, maybe, yes. So when did I start? 1995 I started. And incredibly, back then, it was very easy to do that, to take 2 Sauvignons, for example, from 2 different countries, and know immediately, without even tasting it, know which one was from the old world and which one was from the new world. But especially over the last 20 years, that the lines are they're more blurred, because a lot of new world countries have started planting in slightly cooler areas to get more elegant styles of wine, basically to make their wines a bit more like the old traditional countries. Right. So sometimes now, and vice versa. So sometimes now you can stick your nose in and you know, I could think, well, I'm sure that's from New Zealand, and then you find it's from South Africa or even from France.
And of course you can now keep a wine bottle open for a few days without it going bad, can't you? Are they pumping full of preservatives?
Yeah, well, I have to say, Humphrey, that doesn't happen very often in my house. It's very rare
you finish the bottle, you mean?
That anything goes back in the fridge once it's been eaten. But having said that, generally speaking, once you've opened a bottle, as long as you stick it back in the fridge, I mean, preferably with the top back on, but as long as you keep it cold, even red wine, it will stay in perfectly good condition for 2, 3, even 4 days. But the trick is keeping it cold. And if you can, keeping air away from it.
And that's red wine as well, keeping the red wine cold as well.
Yeah, if I've opened a really nice bottle of red and there's some left, and I know I'm not going to come back to it for a few days, I stick it in the fridge.
Okay. Now, I'm the sort of guy who for many years got terrified when I was hosting a dinner in a restaurant or something and the waiter handed me a wine list because it would just blur and glaze and I didn't know what on earth to do. Why is wine got that thing attached to it, that it's sort of complicated expertise? It's like, going to the opera or something, isn't it?
Well, it is. I mean, and I often remind myself that because I have one job, which is to know about wine, but I always remind myself, like, if I went into John Lewis to buy a camera a few years ago, and the way the guy talked to me about what I needed for my camera, I remind myself that's often how people feel when they're being talked to about wine. I had no idea what he was talking about. I just nodded and hoped that I could get out of there fairly soon without spending too much money, was generally how I felt. But with wine, I guess it's because there are so many possible combinations of different grapes, different countries, different prices, plus also the rules and regulations that come with wine. There are so many words on the label that are, sometimes it feels like you're having to break a code to even understand what is inside and what
is there a deliberate snobbery then that to prove themselves they can talk about the Lafitte meaning this and the whatever meaning that?
Well, I think for a long time that was very true, because especially with old world wines, they don't tell you what grape is in there, they just give you a name. So it will have Rioja on there, for example. It doesn't say this wine is made from Tempranillo with a bit of Grenache and it's been in an oak barrel for 3 years. You're just supposed to know that from the words on the front label, and of course most of us don't. But I do think wine, a lot of producers and retailers actually are working harder to try and explain it. So the back labels have definitely got better since I was doing it, especially, I mean, I'm a bit biased towards the supermarkets, I guess, because I worked for one for so long, but I know a lot of them try and give you a kind of potted history on the back label. But my problem is being able to read the back labels in the first place now. I turn them round and I'm, like that in the supermarket, I can't even read it. But I would always say if you're in a restaurant and somebody hands you a list, before you even get to that stage, have a price in mind, because what you don't want to happen is have that kind of hairdresser paralysis where you get put on the spot and you end up saying, oh, I don't mind, what do you recommend?
Yes, and the waiter comes in and recommends the £400 bottle against the 20 quid bottle. Yeah.
So if you're looking at a list and nothing is jumping out at you, then just say, do you know what, I really like crisp whites, or I really like fruity whites, and I want to spend no more than this much. And generally speaking, if there's somebody in the restaurant who has got something to do with that wine list, nowadays they definitely want you to get the best out of it. So they will help you. But I think often we're too scared to ask, and
there is a thing about it, isn't there? If you start asking, I mean, you can say, what do you recommend? But if you say, well, what do you recommend at this price, and you've got 6 or 8 people around, that but Liz, you have given a great favor too. Liz says, we live and learn. I've just popped my very recently opened red wine into the fridge.
Hey, well done, Liz. Brilliant. And then take it out about 20 minutes before you want to have a glass. Just take it out and put it on the side, and then it'll be perfect temperature.
Okay, we have some answers coming in, which I'm going to get to when we finish our wine thing. But Barbara Snell asks, does your educated palate stretch to other areas? For example, are you discerning with tea and coffee as well?
Well, look, I'm drinking a very average coffee out of a paper cup from the Oval at the moment. I would say, I mean, I absolutely love tea and coffee, and I try and, a bit like wine, I try and drink as many different types as I can. But very much just from enjoying it as a consumer. I wouldn't say I'm an expert in tea or coffee at all, but I so admire. I mean, I remember my old office used to be not very far away from one of the tea buyers, at when I was working at the supermarket, and I found what they did amazing. And of course, they would say this. They would say, but we look at you and think, how do you know all the difference? But when that's all you're doing all day is just tasting,
Right.
then hopefully you get quite good at it.
That's it. And before we move on, because I have a key question to ask you on this, but Suri asks, is it true or a myth that red wine is heart healthy?
So there is, because of the colour on the skins of grapes, in red wine, all the juice in grapes is clear, but when you make a red wine, it takes colour and tannin from the skins of the grapes. And on the skins of the grapes, there are certain compounds that are said to be good for us. So
skin of the red grape, that is.
Yes, so from the red grape, exactly, because the goodness is in the skins, in the tannins and the compounds on the skins. So I think one is called resveratrol, which is, studies have found that is good. It kind of keeps your blood flowing. It's good for blood flow.
Oh, okay.
Hence why the kind of myth that a glass of red wine a day is not good for you. But the French paradox was always, they lived fairly healthy and they always had cheese and wine. So, why was that? So there is something in it. And I did see somebody mentioned Cannonau, is Cannonau from Sardinia, the secret of longevity. Interestingly, where that's come from is that Cannonau is one of the grapes that is very high in resveratrol, in this good ingredient for you. So I'm sure anyone who is producing wine from Canada will tell you, yes, it is the secret of a long life and you should drink a bottle every day.
and when you're knackered, is there a favorite wine or best wine, red, white, whatever, when you're knackered, when you're slumping down and the kids or whatever, what do you go for?
Yeah, well, I have to say, if I'm really knackered and I'm on the sofa, it doesn't take much. Just a glass and a half, and that's it. I'm not moving for the rest.
Glass and a half of anything.
Of anything, yeah. If I'm that tired, I'm not fussy. As long as that's the thing. I have quite a massive. I have FOMO. I have proper fear of missing out when it comes to wine, because there are so many new ones every year, different grapes, different countries. Yeah. I try and taste as much as I can. And when it comes to having a glass of wine in the evening, I'm in a very lucky position in that I'm sent a lot of wine to try, which is why, just on a side note, I have such lovely neighbours, because if I've done a big tasting, I put the bottles on my doorstep like milk bottles and they come and take themselves.
And do you have a massive wine cellar that you sort of, you note down and everything? And
my husband will tell you the garage is no longer a garage, it's just basically full of wine. But no, it's bonkers, because I am sent a lot of stuff to taste, so there's quite a high churn, and yes, it could do with being a bit tidier, I think.
Iris wants to know, do you like English wine?
I love English wine.
Oh, really?
So again, when I started buying, nearly 30 years ago, there was no English wine industry, really. I mean, there was, but very different to what it is today. And I have to say, it's one of the only good things, I can't really say that, but what climate change has done is it's made us warm enough here to be able to ripen grapes enough to make sparkling wine, which is why our sparkling wine now, because we're a good few degrees warmer than we were even 20 years ago. Yes. That's really what's made the difference. And if you make sparkling wine, you need to start with a white wine that's fairly high in acidity, and to get grapes that are high in acidity, you need to grow them in a cool climate, and that's one thing we do have, is a cool climate.
Oh, but sparkling wine is good, but we're not good at red wine, are we, in England yet?
Not yet, because we're not really warm enough, but there are some varieties that quite like it a bit cooler, and one of those grape varieties is Pinot Noir, which is a black grape, or used to make red wine. And we've got a lot of Pinot Noir planted in this country because it's one of the classic champagne grapes that we use to make sparkling wine. Okay. So some producers are now making still red wine from Pinot Noir, and a couple that spring to mind, Gusbourne in Kent. Oh my goodness me, their Pinot Noir is absolutely gorgeous, but it is about £30 a bottle. It's not cheap because the quantities are tiny.
Yeah.
So we're a long way off from, you know, knocking out red wine at £10 a bottle, unfortunately.
I mean, you mentioned something that sparked a question. There's some other questions in, but this one is that you mentioned Champagne just now, and that comes from a specific region of France. But in the past 30, 50 years or something, the market for Champagne has gone huge.
Yes.
So, and when you go down to some small little vineyard in France or something, you say, right, well, Tesco wants to buy this.
Yeah.
How does this small vineyard produce enough for what the market wants?
Well, that is the kind of perennial question of working out how much you need. So as a supermarket buyer, you were always having to predict how much you might need to sell and order in enough so you had enough, because there is a finite amount. You can't just suddenly call up and say, oh, by the way, can we have another lorry load? The answer would be no, you can't, because it's all been allocated somewhere else. You know, and Champagne takes a good couple of years to make, at least from when you start making it to when it's ready to release in bottle. Whereas something like Prosecco, which is made bubbly in a big tank rather than in a bottle, you know, it takes about 40 days to make Prosecco. So if you need more Prosecco, you can ring up and get some.
And that comes from anywhere in Italy, does it?
It's up in the north. It's still like Champagne. It's still you know, marked by a specific region, mostly in the Veneto. But interestingly, Prosecco, when it became really popular, you know, this is going back sort of 10, 15 years ago, when the Prosecco just went completely mad. The region that was marked out that you could only, you know, the grapes had to be from this region to be called Prosecco. Brilliantly, the Italians just made the region bigger. so
Very Italian, isn't it?
Suddenly there was more available. Now they have done, I mean, in Champagne it has extended a tiny bit, but not really. I mean, you know, that there is what there is to make, and that's it. But I mean, what is interesting, I think, we're going back to English wine for a second, is we've now got Taittinger, Pommery, and there's another one whose name escapes me. 3 big champagne houses have bought vineyards in the UK in the last 10 years. So they're moving north, because actually Champagne as a region is warming up, and the style of Champagne is changing very subtly, but it is changing. They're sort of getting bigger, and so they're searching for cooler spots. So I think
if Taittinger, you know, grows its grape here in Britain, is that still a Champagne, or is it a Saxonane or something?
No. So they will make they will make, yes, exactly, they'll make an English sparkling wine, and it will be labelled as I think Taittinger, for example, theirs is called Domaine Evremond, and they planted the vines about 5 years ago, I think. So we won't see a wine from them for I think it's next year, maybe their first release comes out, or maybe even the year after.
Margaret A wants to know, is there a way to tell if one white wine is less acidic than another?
Generally, only by tasting it. But if you need to know before you taste it, which is preferable, you don't want to buy it and get it home and then find it's not, you know, it's too acidic for you. That's when it's handy to start to understand why different grapes from different countries taste as they do, because something like a dry German Riesling is high in acidity, has high natural acidity. Chablis is another one that can, you know, has very natural high acidity. I mean, for acidity, I would talk about freshness. It's that kind of ping that you get. Whereas wine like made from a grape like Viognier, for example, grown in a sunny spot in Chile, has it still has acidity, but it's not as pronounced. It's a bit rounder and riper. So that's the good thing about knowing what style you like, is then you can start to avoid the stuff you know you don't like. And
is all that in here, which I'm going to get to in a second?
It's all in there, is it? Okay. It's all in there.
There you go, Mark. And is the answer to Sura's question then, are sulfites in red wine dangerous short, long term?
Yeah, so this is really interesting. People have been talking about sulfites a lot more in recent years, and I hear all the time people saying to me, you know, the sulfites give me a headache. The reality is that sulfites the reason why sulfur is used in the first place is sulfur is actually a natural byproduct of fermentation. So all wines have a little bit of sulfur in them. Like there's no such thing as a sulfur-free wine, but sulfur is used as a preservative because it basically keeps air away from whatever it is you're trying to protect. So sulfur is used in ketchup, in orange juice, in dried fruits, all sorts of different foodstuffs. And it is used in wine, but in very small amounts. So there's 40 times more sulfur in a bag of apricots than there is a bottle of wine, for example. And we generally don't tend to blame our hangover on that last apricot that we had last night. You tend to blame the wine. There are some people, unfortunately, I think it's estimated to be around 1 or 2% of the population that does have a really horrible reaction to sulfites, even in tiny amounts, and it will kick off a headache. I've seen, people sometimes get straight away their sinuses go, but headache is the most common. So if you are one of those people, unfortunately, there's not very much you can do about it other than stick to organic wines, because legally organic wines have to use slightly lower amounts of added sulfur than normal wines.
Okay, that's okay. That we've got that, and that's all in here, which we're going to. But now we've got the answers we're going to have to our next question, which I think, and I'm so bad, I haven't seen where they go from one to the other, but I think we have Carmel. So this is spicy chicken drumsticks. What is the wine that goes with spicy? Carmel says Riesling. Margaret a Pinot Grigio. Jean Joyce, a Spanish Rioja is lovely with everything. Emma, I'm going to leave to last because I think we might have a. Adam Williams says a Spumante. Do we have any others in there? And Emma says, and I think bland or a Chardonnay wine.
Yeah, so Chardonnay, that's kind of spot on, because Chardonnay, particularly one from a warmer region, which has got a bit more fruit and body to it, would go, because I think we've said, it's the spice in the dish that needs a wine with enough flavour to meet that. But I have to say somebody said spumante there, bubbles and fried chicken, anything fried, like fish and chips, have it with a glass of sparkling anything, because bubbles help cut through the batter. So it's like a whip of freshness.
Okay, and Carol makes my own wine, which never gives me a headache. Is that red or white or sparkling, Carol? Tell us. Fantastic. And send a bottle to Helen.
Yes,
she'll give it to her neighbours
and
review it. Brilliant. Now we are going to move on. I'm going to put the next question out there. This is fun. And then I'm going to ask you to give us a real top line from this. Then we're going to move on to love and literature, because our second wine question is about literary genres. And there's no right answer, but there is a Helen choice here. What is the best wine for crime fiction?
Yes.
The best wine for crime fiction. Okay, put your guesses and your comments in there. And before we leave this and move on to novels and literature, as I said, I'm the guy that's terrified to look at a wine list in case I get it wrong. If I carry this with me, will it solve my problems? Will I know when to order a Saint Emilion or a Lafite or a bottle of Tesco's Plonk?
I hand on heart, this book was written, I basically based this on the 10 years of being a supermarket wine buyer and trying to answer all the questions I'd had from friends, family, and customers in those 10 years. Because often I would get the panicked phone call from a friend in the wine aisle on a Friday at 4:00 saying, what shall I buy? I'm having this for dinner, or, I need to buy something because I'm going around to somebody's house. What do I get? And that's why I started the blog, which was the Knackered Mother's Wine Club, just to put up a couple of wine recommendations every week, and then told my friends to go and look at that.
Right.
And that then grew, and suddenly I was getting comments from people I wasn't related to or didn't know in real life. And that's when I thought, actually, this really has got legs. And that blog became the book. And the blog still runs today.
And I know, I looked at it. I mean, it's fantastic. And you've got thousands of or hundreds of thousands of followers. But one final question: if I'm having a dinner party with, the leader of the hunt and the lord of this and lady so and so and the nephew of the queen or whatever around the table, and I bring in a bottle of wine with the Tesco's label on it, is that now okay to do that?
I think it is definitely okay to do it if you have got a bit of, as long as you can say, the reason I chose this is because the thing is about those wines,
yes,
this is kind of in the book, but very often those wines in the, all the supermarkets have their kind of posh label, own label, if you know what I like,
yes,
like Finest, or Sainsbury's have Taste the Difference and Morrison's have the best. In those wine ranges, when you think about it, the wine buyers have spent a lot of time and energy on getting those wines right because it's got their name on it, essentially. Yeah. But also they tend to be able to work with really good quality producers to source those wines, and then often those producers might be selling other wines in the range as well, but the blood, sweat and tears goes into those wines, I can tell you. I know, I used to do it myself.
You've sweated and bled on it.
And very often now if I'm in a supermarket, that's the range that I'll head to. So M&S, for example, have a new range called Found, and Found is all about like I would say slightly more unusual grapes from countries you don't always see. You might not have be familiar with them, but they're trying to essentially say, look, just have a taste of this. They're all under £10. Most of them, I think, are around £8. And there are 12 wines in the range, and there is not a bad one in there. They are all.
And if you've got the same one from Fortnum Masons, if you've got your £10 wine from Tesco's and bought an equivalent Fortnum Masons, that's going to cost you what, £40, is it?
Well, yeah, you'll probably pay a bit more because obviously a supermarket is buying an awful lot more than they might be. Plus, also, you're paying for the privilege of buying a wine from somewhere that's frightfully smart. But I have to say, I love the Fortnum. I've had quite a few of the Fortnum Mason wines, and they unsurprisingly do work with incredible producers. So the wines are lovely, but you just pay a bit more.
But you pay. Now Carol has got back to us. That Carol, our Goldster Inside Story winemaker, has got. I make my own wine, which never gives me a headache. Elderflower with ginger, sometimes blackberry, and any fruits I can find.
You see, but the secret there is, I think the secret to Carol's wine is that they'll be completely natural, so no nasties in there, nothing, and also they won't be that high in fruit wines, won't be that high in alcohol, and alcohol is the single biggest bad guy when it comes to having a hangover.
Oh, right.
That's what gives you the headache, is the alcohol. Alcohol dehydrates us. And if we're dehydrated and you haven't had enough water, that's what will make you feel dreadful. So glass of wine for every glass of water, have a glass of wine.
Okay, lovely. I'm going to drink some water now to my dehydrated coffee. But quick yes or no to this from Surrey: are red wines suitable for vegetarians?
So again, most wines nowadays are suitable for vegetarians. In the old days, sometimes when most wines are fined. That means something is used to pass through the wine to take out all the bits that might be left, like bits of grape skin or pulp or flesh or yeasts after it's been fermented. And the fining agent, as we call them, most are suitable for vegetarians, like they use a pea protein now or clay. But in the old days, a lot more people would use gelatin, which is an animal byproduct, or egg white, for example. So that if they use egg white, then the wine technically isn't suitable for vegans. I mean, just to say that when these agents, when whatever is used goes through the wine, at the end there is no trace of them left in the wine, but they have come into contact with them at some point. Hence why you have to say whether a wine is suitable for vegetarians or vegans.
Okay, right.
Funny enough, I have learned just today, here's hot off the press, because this was mentioned in a meeting that I was in earlier, is that all of the Marks and Spencer's own label wines are suitable for vegetarians now.
Oh, right. Okay, because Surrey actually makes a point. They do not label it as suitable for vegetarians, though. So that's beginning to happen, is it? So
that's definitely beginning to happen. Yes, exactly.
And Emma says, thanks, Carol, for her wine. And now we're going to start a Goldster wine club, I think, or a wine blog. So Helen, you are going to be our star presenter for that or something, but we'll
definitely
sort that out later, because now we're going to get the answers to the crime fiction wine at the end of this next tranche of our conversation, which is about the New Forest and love and books about changing everything. Now, I just want to say you begin this. We got, oh, snap. I
never go anywhere without it.
You know, this changes everything. So Annabelle loves James, who is her husband. But in the opening scene, he's lost his keys and he's sort of blaming other people for it. And there are things need doing around the house that he's not doing. So what Annabelle really wants to do is pour a bowl of cereal over his head. Is this loving family that we see in the New Forest of the Nacarinius Maternius?
That is, yes, basically taken straight from my real life, straight from a moment in my real life. It's the key thing. I mean, why do you do that? I don't understand why every husband in the land always says, where are my keys? And I have to stop myself from saying, where you left them, every time.
So have you poured cereal over your husband's head?
I haven't quite gone that far, but this is the beauty of fiction, is that sometimes you can write out, you can just basically write out your angst in your writing. So that was a particular moment. I think the point of writing that, the opening scene, was to convey the fact that, life with a house full of children, particularly small children, and it's chaotic and messy and often infuriating, but it's also just magical.
Yeah. And in the novel, talk about both of them. What is your main theme? You've got an infuriating magical scene there, and you've got this thing of this change everything about the first love. So talk us through it.
Well, I think that's the thing. So I wanted to write a book that was about love, but I didn't want it to just be one kind of love, boy meets girl. It's also about the love between two sisters. It's about the love between a mother and her daughters. It's about the love between, a couple that have been married for a long time. It's about the love between a couple that were in love when they were young and haven't seen each other for a long time. So really it was just being able to look at all those different meanings of love. And I guess the hook for the whole book is that idea of eternal love. You don't have to be like this all the way through your life to have that eternal love. If somebody is in your life and you love them, they'll be in it no matter what. It might be years go by, but essentially when you're together again, the love will still be there. It might have changed a bit, but it will still be there.
And so give me an idea of what this word love is then, because you've come out on lots of different, the children, the husband, the friends, the relatives, and you also said your neighbors love you because you've got wine. So,
yes.
So is it transactional, or what is it, or what do you describe it in how do we learn about love, more about love, from reading your novels?
I guess I just really like the idea that you might think you know what love is, but the only way you're really going to find out is when life happens to you. Because you'll make certain choices as a person in your life, as to whether who you want to be with or don't want to be with, or whether you want to be with anyone at all. But often, a lot of what happens in your life is also slightly out of your control. And so how do you deal with that? I mean, there is a line in the book where the main character, Annie, who has been with James for a long time and they've got children, and her sister Jess isn't married, hasn't met the right person, and she makes a throwaway comment to her sister Annie one day, basically saying, well, it's easy for you, you're lucky. And Annie completely loses it, says it's not just luck. Like, having a successful relationship you need to put the work in. It doesn't just happen. It takes two, and it is about, you know, learning to try and bring out the best in each other. And there are good times and bad times, but essentially, if you love somebody, you have to work through that, you know, no matter what. It doesn't just happen. You can't not put the work in and it just happen.
And the sister thought that she could just buy it off the shelf, as it were.
Yeah, essentially.
And knew that the ups and downs of a strong relationship.
Essentially, exactly.
But then there is a stage that you know when you do love someone, as opposed to not, when you can walk away as opposed to not walk away. I mean, you want to pour some cereal over his head, but you love him deeply. There's a sort of contradiction there, isn't there?
And I think, I mean, this is just from my personal experience, but I remember by the time I married, my husband and I got married, as I've already told you, we had been together for quite a long time. We were only in our late 20s when we got married, but we'd already been together for about 15 years. But so a lot of people said, well, it's not really going to change how you feel. But for me, it changed an awful lot. It really did, because I think for me, getting married was just that difference of saying, do you know what? Actually, from now on, even if we have a massive argument about something really fundamental, we're not going anywhere. It's our duty now to sit down and work it out. Nobody can go, no one can go. I mean, you could if you really wanted to, but essentially that's the commitment you're making to each other, is I'm in this for good, and let's see what happens.
So what is it that changes everything?
So what changes everything in this is when to give you a précis of what happens, the mother, lovely, the mother is quite infuriating, and she's been married quite a few times before. She's called Julia, and she's amazing. Absolutely nothing to do with the fact that my own mother has been married a couple of times and is quite amazing as well.
Nothing autobiographical at all, right? Okay.
And I also, funnily enough, I also have a sister who wasn't married for a long time. And I have to tell you, the funniest thing, when I first wrote this and I realized this book was coming out with a mother and two daughters, and I, you know, there's my mother and two daughters, I thought I'd better sit down and tell both my mother and my sister separately that I was writing a novel. It's about a mother and two daughters. And I said to them, you know, but I don't want you to think it's about you. These are made up characters. And they both said to me, okay, yeah, you know, that's fine. Yeah, that's how exciting. And then both separately, the first thing both of them said is, so who's like the main character? so that
They didn't want to be one of.
Both of them wanted to be the main character, and I said, actually, I am. I'm. You know, it's the other sister. It's not you. So even though they are made up characters, and they're basically a massive exaggeration and an amalgamation of lots of different people. You know, I did have a framework in mind. But what changes everything is Julia gets a letter from her first love, and they have not seen each other since they were teenagers. And she gets a letter, and her first love, who's called Patrick, says that a very old friend of theirs has passed away, and his last wish was that his ashes were spread in a place in Rome. And so Patrick writes to Julia and says, I know we haven't seen each other for a long time, but will you come with me to Rome to spread this lovely chap's ashes? Julia, who is just brilliant and unattached, but not thinking anything other than, well, why not go to Rome? You know, I know this man, I haven't seen him for a long time. We're both on our own. We'll have a lovely time as friends. So off she goes to Rome. But what happens, without giving anything away, is that both sisters, Annie and Jess, decide, they both have their own reasons for needing a short break at short notice. Annie's is because she's had enough of the chaos and the cereal on head scenario. Plus also her husband James forgets their anniversary. That's the straw that broke the camel's back. And the other sister, Jess, has her reasons for wanting to get out of town for a few days. So actually the sisters follow their mother there without her knowing, and the tale really unfolds in Rome, and that is where they all find something out that changes all of their lives forever.
Oh, I see. So the secrets are revealed. And give us the top line of your latest one, In Just One Day.
So in Just One Day, there is a definite theme I'm realizing, because I've just finished writing my third fiction novel, but this is the second one, In Just One Day. And this too, as you can see, it says everything can change. Yes. This is about, rather than, I wanted to explore how things can change in love over a long period of time. In the first book, This Changes Everything, because it changes in ways that you can't ever imagine or predict. But with this one, In Just One Day, this is a different type of book. This is about another couple, but it's siblings. There's a brother and sister.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, spoiler, it's not a spoiler because it's on the back cover, but essentially something happens in Just One Day that changes everything forever. Right. And this one is more about love and loss and grief, and how people deal with that differently, and how you actually find your way back to happiness. And this was written more, this is quite a personal one to me, because I did lose my brother 22 years ago when he was only 26, and very suddenly as well. So I mean, this really did happen to me. I woke up one day and you know, Tim, my gorgeous 6'2" brother, was not here anymore. And it's taken me 20 years to pluck up the courage to write this book. And what's really interesting is, when I first decided to write a fiction book, I thought I might write this one. And by the stage that I was writing this book, the editor of this one, who was a very experienced editor, and we had become absolutely firm friends through the course of writing this book, because she's so fantastic. And I told her my idea, and she knew my circumstances. And she brilliantly said to me, it's the best piece of advice I had, was she said, you've got to write a fiction book. You must write a fiction book, but don't write that one first. Write another one first. Right.
In order to get the process going,
yes,
and
exactly.
the discipline in that.
Yes, exactly. And so actually I'm so happy that this was my first book, because it was such a beautiful story to write. And, you know, and it has sadness in there too, but, you know, I'm never going to write a book without a happy ending. I have to say that right here and now.
Well, that's good. That's good, because
life is too short for that. I can't bear it when I read books that leave me either wanting more or disappointed, or, you know, something happens that I just don't want to happen. But there are similar themes in the book, but it's just a different way of exploring them.
So I've got a question for you at the end, but we're now going to go to the answers of the crime fiction thing.
Oh yes.
And I want to come back to this for a bit. We have, I think I've got it right, and forgive me if I haven't. This is what is the wine to drink, best wine to drink for crime fiction? Iris says Pinot Noir, Burgundy, or Port. Barbara Snell says crime fiction, wine, Petit Chablis.
Yeah.
Adam Williams says vintage port. And then we have one right down the end here, which I have to scroll, is that when I'm sitting outside, this is from Jean Joyce, when I'm sitting outside my Spanish home on a summer evening reading a crime novel with a lovely glass of Rioja, heaven.
I have to say, Jean, that's a fantastic answer, because you're right. You need, you know, but mostly because she's sitting outside her Spanish home in the sun. But I suggested in my book, because basically I went through all the genres, and I've suggested a wine with every genre. And for crime, it's Malbec, because you want something that's a bit dark and brooding and a little bit dangerous. So actually Rioja could do that's quite dark and brooding. Vintage port, that's very dark and brooding. So I think we're all on a theme here of the dark and broody.
And before we go to we've rushed through this, we're coming up to the proms. Before I go to this, a very quick answer. What is your genre, and what wine should you drink with it?
So, well, you know what I'm going to say mine is. Mine is romance. It's got to be romance, definitely.
Yes.
Although I do have a penchant for the old bonnet buster, I have to say. But it depends what sort of romance, but also it depends what mood I'm in. I think, and also what the weather's like. I'm quite fussy. If it's sunny outside and I'm sitting outside reading romance, it's going to be a cold, chill glass of rosé because it's pink.
Yes.
If I'm celebrating, it's going to be fizz, I think, because you can never be unhappy when you're drinking something with bubbles in the glass.
It's okay. The bubbles in the grass for the ups and downs. Sarah Friend has got a very nice note there, which read it whilst I talk about the promos. But she read your book and found it really uplifting. Is it quite personal? So have a read of that, Helen. And I'm going to tell people what we've got coming up, and then I'm coming back to you. Tomorrow is the 13th of May. It is, yes. Lucinda is with Sarita Domingo, author of The Three of Us, Real Life, True Love, Grief and Joy, and the Power of Friendship, and a romance writer, because Sarita is an editor at Mills and Boon, and that is a romance imprint. And then on the May the 19th, that's a week today, Goldster is doing poetry with the magnificent Brian Patton, who came to fame in the 1960s and is a co-author of the Mersey Sound poetry collection that will be setting that poetry alongside the great music of that era. Brian will be with Lucinda. I'm with Rachel Trethaway on May the 20th, who's the author of The Churchill Girls, talking about Winston Churchill's 4 extraordinary daughters who helped mold an era and his political career. And then on May 26th, although on the website it says May 22nd, ignore that, it's May 26th, we travel to the Levant with an author of Greek, British, and Italian parentage whose family arrived in Egypt and Palestine as migrants in the mid-19th century. I'm with Michael Vatikiotis for a fascinating story about the Middle East from 1850 to 1950. There are wines from the Middle East, aren't there? It's not just France and Argentina. They've got some great wines.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, the cradle of wine was, over that way anyway, 7000 BC. So no, they have a very rich history of winemaking.
Yes. It's any you can recommend, and put it against a genre too. Any Syrian, Lebanese wine that you can...
There is there are some wonderful Lebanese wines, particularly, and there is one in M&S that comes to mind that is £10. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but I know I've recommended it on Saturday Kitchen fairly recently.
That's your BBC One TV show.
Yes, I do the wine on Saturday Kitchen some Saturdays. I'm on Saturday, and so it's about £10. It's their Lebanese red, and it is, oh my word, that is a lovely dark, broody, spicy red. It's gorgeous.
Would that be with a Middle Eastern thriller, do you think? A James Bond in Beirut?
Yes, it could. And just as important, with a really lovely, rich stew, slow cooked, slow roasted kind of stew.
Slow roasted stew, a James Bond in Beirut, and a Lebanese £10 bottle of wine. Liz says, what a tonic Helen is. A note to self, drink more wine. It's a great interview. Thank you. Sarah, thank you for your lovely note about your brother and Helen's brother. And that's it. Time is up. Helen has got to go and play some cricket now, or taste some wine, or whatever, whatever our finest Nacaredius Maternius has got to get back to work, and then back home to the bearded grumpiest Paternius, and then do her lovely, loving neighbours, whatever they are, in the New Forest. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for the cyber conversations. Now, buy the Knackered Mother's Wine Guide. Brace yourselves for this changes everything in just one day. Until tomorrow, and Lucinda, with love, grief, joy, friendship, and romance. What is the wine that you drink with romance? It was a sparkling wine, wasn't it?
I think rosé or bubbles.
Rosé or bubbles with Mills and Boon Romance, and from the magnificently unknackered Helen McGinn. Stay involved, stay curious, and stay safe. Bye. Bye, Helen. Thank you.
Bye.